Okay. Yeah, I think we are recording now. So we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays, Season 9. Environmental Fridays, it is personal. You can find more information at our website, www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. So you could use the link, or you can also use the QR code at the bottom right corner. Um, our ninth season, this semester, we've had already a wide variety of topics, very interesting, impactful topics, and very experienced and knowledgeable guest speakers. And we have more to come, starting with today. You could see citizen science is something that's been growing over the last couple of decades, and we'll hear more about that in terms of biodiversity. And you can see the rest of our upcoming um, presentations, speakers, and topics here. To find out more about our guest speakers and the co hosts, you can use the QR code in the top left corner. That will get you directly to their photos, their bios, a little bit about themselves. And then in the bottom right corner, we have now 141 episodes on YouTube. So that QR code there would take you to all of our past episodes on YouTube. We also want to acknowledge partners, co sponsors, which includes the Michigan Environmental Department, EGLE for short, Caribbean Compass, which is a magazine, I believe a monthly magazine, the American Chemical Society Committee on Minority Affairs, ACS, Committee on Minority Affairs, long standing 23, 24 years of collaboration and working with the Benton Spirit, which is a local community newspaper. In fact, we are live streaming from the offices of the Benton Spirit, which his a bit of history is that this was one of Al Capone's hideout places. Interesting historical tidbit. And then GC scored, Every Piece Matters, has a long name, but it basically deals with social emotional wellness. And that is developed, run by my sister. I think she's on here today. So those are our partners, those are our co-sponsors of Environmental Fridays. And here you could see what's happening for this month. I believe we have another November 21st. There's another date, right? In November the 28th. Yeah. Okay. Um, then one of the things I've been trying to have people do is to give us your thoughts after each episode, or if you go to our YouTube channel and you look at different episodes, give us your thoughts, your feedback, 100 words or less, put your name, affiliation, send it to me, and we will publish it. We do have a page that's dedicated to feedback and testimonials regarding Environmental Fridays. So at this point, I'd like to introduce my co-host for today. Our co-host for today is Lena Dempy Wolf. I hope I'm not butchering your.
Yeah, yes, that's fine.
Okay. Is that German? What is that?
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm originally German, but I'm a transplant, so I've been living in Trinidad most of my life.
Okay, okay. So Lena would be with us today. Sierra wasn't able to make it today. She just emailed me about that this morning. Some emergency came up, but we acknowledge her willingness also to participate. But for Lena, I've known her now, I think 2, maybe going on 3 years. And part of the connection with her was through my interest in stingless bees. And she gave a great presentation as well before. Um, and she has a WhatsApp group that basically, if you want to learn anything about stingless bees, the conversation is ongoing every single day. So there's a lot of interested people there. So that's some of the things that she does. So, which is in fact citizen science, right? It's citizen science. So she is a biodiversity specialist at the Environmental Policy and Planning Division in the Ministry of Planning and Development of Trinidad and Tobago. She's part of our government there. And she coordinates the execution of BestNet TT. I think BestNet came out from Germany, wasn't it? Or some European group.
Not that, well, one of the funding agencies that supports BestNet is a German agency, yes. But
Yeah.
BestNet um is a collection, it comes out of a collection of organizations.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it's coordinated under, I believe, under UNDP.
Yeah, and
Don't quote me directly on
they
that.
offer funding for environmental projects, don't they? They
So for
put,
the most part, BestNet does um they work in supporting IPBES in coordinating science policy and practice components around the globe, very often through bringing people together, through trying to shine a light on IPBES activities and assessments that came out of various things. And some cases, there's funding involved for some types of projects. So our pollinator project was supported because BestNet was supporting the IPBES assessment on pollinators and food production. So it depends.
okay.
It was more meant as in our case, it was more meant as a sort of a seed fund,
Mm,
and not continuous funding. So they have different types of arrangements and different types of things, but they do a lot of work in terms of bringing together scientists, policymakers, and practitioners to try to develop and share a cohesive voice on science and to make decision making more scientifically based.
okay,
So,
good,
hoping I
good.
did that justice.
So yes, yes, yes. So you just heard her mention about pollinators. So she is in fact a pollination ecologist and ecosystem services specialist. One of the things I'm really impressed with being on that WhatsApp group is that when persons post pictures or videos of different insects, particularly bees, she is able to identify them exactly. It's just simply amazing to me. So anyway, so this is her expertise. And so her past research focused on identification, assessment, evaluation of pollination services in neotropical agricultural landscapes. So I think she's a great fit for being our co-host and being part of this episode. So now you will hear from her as she introduces our guest speaker for today.
Okay, hi again, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce Corey Callahan, who is an assistant professor in wildlife ecology and conservation at the University of Florida. And he is based at Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center. He has published over 100 scientific papers spanning global to local scales and across taxa from butterflies to birds, so everything. His research leverages big data from citizen science platforms such as iNaturalist and eBird, combined with remote sensing to understand biodiversity in space and time. Callahan's work emphasizes how species and communities respond to human-driven habitat change. Outside of research, he's often found birding and INATing throughout Florida and beyond. And I am personally very excited about this because I think citizen science is incredibly important. So I'm very excited to hear um, what's coming up. So over to you.
All right.
Cool. Thank you. Let's see if I can do this appropriately. That looks okay.
It's still coming up. There you go. It's up
Okay.
now. Uh-huh.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's really nice to be here and talking to you all. So today I'm going to basically give a high level overview of how I think and demonstrate how citizen science is kind of reshaping biodiversity as like a research field. But first, I'm going to start with a personal story. If my slides will advance. Okay. So this is a butterfly, obviously. I took this photograph way back when I was doing my PhD. I did a collections trip for birds in Malaita in the Solomon Islands. So I took that photograph of a butterfly. Now, bear with me here. I joined iNaturalist in 2019. And the timeline, I know this seems weird, but the timeline's important. And so I joined iNaturalist in 2019. That photo, however, I took in October of 2018, before I ever joined iNaturalist. And I joined in 2019. What happens when you join iNat is like if you have a lot of photos of stuff, you end up going back through them and like uploading them and like basically trying to get your list up. And so I submitted that observation in 2020, a year after I joined iNaturalist, the platform. And at the time, I'm not a lepidopterist, so I don't really know, what that species is. So I just went with the computer vision and I just said, okay, this genus that I've never heard of, and I left it there. So that was, 5 years. An entire year goes by to 2021, right? So multiple, like 3 years after I took this photograph, and 2 years after I joined iNaturalist, and an expert comes in and they said, hey, this is endemic to Malaita, and the first live shot of one. In other words, it's the first time that this species, Argrino nympha danker, has ever been photographed alive. Previously, the only photographs existing of that species were from collected specimens. So I was like, and I was like, that's kind of crazy and cool. And I did some research and I was like, man, this is awesome. And it made me feel like this, right? I felt really happy and I was like, this is cool. This is like why I got into biodiversity research in the first place. And I gained species knowledge. It gave me a sense of discovery and it was just like kind of fun. Turns out, this is some recent research from one of my graduate students that I'm not alone, right? So I set us up there a little bit. But the top three motivations for people contributing to citizen science, and in this case, iNaturalist, are indeed species knowledge, discovery, and fun, right? So this was from a survey that we had recently published. This is a Likert scale showing these percentages basically show kind of like how important that these categories are. And sure enough, species knowledge, discovery, and fun are among the most important topics and motivations for why people contribute to citizen science. So that's just a brief introduction to a little bit about me and my interests and how my research kind of intertwines with my personal life. But first, let's back up a little bit to what is citizen science. It's a term that also is referred to as participatory science, community science. They all, in my mind, currently mean the same thing, which is involvement between the public and data collection and scientific research. And so this idea of education, engagement, and scientific research. And one point that I like to make is that like any citizen science, participatory science program is interdisciplinary in nature, right? Because you involve people in the collection and in research and in the collection, in this case, biodiversity data. So citizen science is a very like rapidly evolving field. I'll age myself a little bit, but somewhere right around here is when I got my first smartphone. And this, this black line is citizen science in the literature. And you can see this absolutely massive increase because in large part to this like smartphone revolution, we now can, as that's ironic, as an iPhone is talking, so that's kind of weird. Um, and so because everybody has these smartphones in their pocket, it allows us to document and identify the organisms that we share the planet with. So all these people contribute data that then ends up going to what's called GBIF. This is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It's the largest biodiversity data aggregator that we have in the world. There's over 2 billion records of biodiversity in this database. And in this map here is all those biodiversity records. And you can see these red, the more red, the more data. And so you can see these large geographic biases across the world. And I'll kind of come back to that in a few minutes as well. So with GBIF, since 2007, there's been a 12-fold increase in data. This is in large part due to like the smartphone revolution, but also digitization and mobilization of existing data, herbarium specimens, museum specimens that have now made its way into this biodiversity data aggregator. But what I'm focused on today is, again, citizen science. And since 2010, greater than 80% of the data in GBIF have been contributed by citizen science projects. Today, I'm going to focus on two that I personally and professionally spend a lot of time on and invested in, and those are iNaturalist and eBird. So first, I'll give just, I can't see the room, so I don't know how many people are familiar with these two platforms. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of each. eBird was launched by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in 2002, I think, and it's by and large one of the most successful citizen science projects in the world, and that's in large part because they capitalize on bird watchers listing OCD-ness, and so they've been really successful in giving tools to birders that allow data collection as well. And so you submit what's called a checklist. And so here's just an example checklist on my phone, and it's like a semi-automated data. And so these red dots mean that it's really rare. This is from Sydney, Australia. Whereas like this no dot means that it's like common and expected. But then there's also infrequent species. And if you get like a rare species, it has to go through this process and has to be vetted by the community, which often means a photograph or documentation of that before it's entered into the database itself. And with these data, you can see some really cool patterns. No, maybe I should have checked the videos like Desmond said. Why is that not? Let's try it. Oh, okay, now it's working. Sorry, I think. You can see these patterns. This is an American robin using very advanced statistical machine learning models. You can see this like pattern of migration through time. Let's see if I can do it one more time. Nope, but you can see another one, Eastern meadowlark. So this is week of the year. You can see red, purple equals highly more abundant, where yellow equals less abundant. And so you can see like with these data, we're absolutely able to see like new and novel patterns that we haven't really been able to see before at large scales because eBirders and birders are contributing this data. And so when I talk about data, I often refer myself as like a desktop ecologist or a data parasite because there's so many people collecting data. And this is, in my mind, the definition of big data is this like exponential increase. So this is through time, a little outdated now, but the blue line is checklists and the green is observations. And each one of these peaks is migration time, right? That's when birders go nuts. They spend all their time outside. I don't show up into the office as nearly as much as I should. And in May, eBird as a platform, throughout the entire month of May, averages about 7 observations per second.
Wow.
Right. So this is like mind-boggling amounts of data. And even if this curve leveled off and like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it kind of levels off, we're talking about big data that is fundamentally shifting how we use, how we think about biodiversity. So the next platform I want to introduce is iNaturalist. In contrast to eBird, iNaturalist is less structured. In other words, anybody can download the app and you need a photo, but you can go anywhere, anytime. And there is no list. It's just like, hey, here's a photo of a random plant I saw or a random stingless bee, and you can upload that photo to a community of experts that help you identify it. So I'll give a brief overview of what iNaturalist is, in case anybody's not familiar. It's a multi-taxa platform. It's a registered 501c3 non-independent organization here in the United States. It's a smartphone app and a web-based platform. I think that's a really important point. I'm guessing most of you that if you do have iNaturalist, you probably mostly interact with the smartphone side of things, but the web-based platform has a lot of features that I think, especially for researchers and in order to identify things, it's completely free, and the URL is just iNaturalist.org. And as a researcher, as a scientist, we get three key pieces of data. What is it? Where is it? When is it there? Right? The what, where, when. So what is it? Is simply species. So more than 530,000 species have been documented on iNaturalist. Here's an example. This is a southern skipperling. So this is the what, it's a species. And where is it? It's in my backyard, turns out. If anybody ever is in South Florida, I'm about 15 minutes from the Fort Lauderdale Airport, so feel free to stop on by. These are my coordinates, which I guess is being recorded and will be on YouTube. And you can zoom out a little bit further. And so, right, so this individual is in my backyard, but where is southern skipperling a little bit at a higher level? Each one of these red dots represents a previous record. The reason I chose the species is because like it's a pretty rare butterfly, so I was like really excited to see it in my backyard. Now you can zoom out a little bit further even and see, oh, southern skipperling is a Southeast United States species. Like this is the entire geographic range of the species. They get into Mexico, but in general, it's a Southeast species. So that's the what and the where. And then the when is it there, right? And so you can see the seasonality. With just a quick glance, you can tell that this is a late fall flying species, right? So very easily you can tell that this species flies in the fall. Okay, so that's just a brief intro into iNaturalist and eBird. And so as I said, I contribute to both of these a lot personally, but I'm also very interested in how these platforms are kind of reshaping research and policy. So here I'm going to focus on I'm going to give two case studies, two recently published papers from my research group. One is going to be on research and one is going to focus on policy. So we set out to ask, how are researchers using this data? And specifically, I mean iNaturalist data here. And so the nice thing about iNaturalist is that it's a pretty unique term. It's not going to be found in the literature unless it is probably referring to the iNaturalist platform. So one of my employees, I was like, hey, we should really do this because nobody's written this paper yet and nobody's really taken this high level view. So she typed it into Google Scholar and there was over 11,000 hits in iNaturalist during Google Scholar. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback.
Yeah, I just
Muted.
Yeah, I'm muted now.
Okay. Oh, good. So there's over 11,000 hits. Long story short, we sorted through those, got to about 6,000, sorted through those. We ended up with about just over 2,000 articles that met our criteria. And we manually extracted data from those 2,000 articles. And, about 6 months into this project, I realized why nobody had ever done this because there's a lot of work involved. So for each article, each peer-reviewed study, we extracted the study area, the topic, the taxonomy, so what species we're focused on, then the analyses and the data type and data role. So the topics, we had 8 topics, distribution or range, kind of like understanding where species are, biology, comparison of the data quality of iNaturalist with other sources, climate change, species discovery. So this is meaning a new species to science, like iNaturalist contributed to a new description of a species that had never been described before to science. And then we had a catch-all other as well. And I'll jump right into the results. So here we have the number of iNaturalist observations in millions through time. So again, you see this near exponential increase through time. And we were a little bit surprised, but you have pretty much the same pattern in the number of peer-reviewed articles using iNaturalist, mirroring the number of observations submitted to iNaturalist, right? So as the number of observations grows, so too does the use of it in scientific literature. iNaturalist data was used in scientific research from 128 countries. Right, so we were I knew it was used a lot anecdotally, but I was pretty shocked by the just pervasiveness of how throughout the world, how many countries have used iNaturalist data to publish something peer-reviewed literature? Strong bias towards the US, obviously, in large part because there's so many researchers here. But still, even almost every country in Africa had at least a couple studies that had used iNaturalist, right? Places where, quite frankly, there just isn't that much biodiversity knowledge. And so iNaturalist is really valuable in some of these places. Taxonomically, over 638 families were represented in the analysis. The top one being insects, then plants, mammals, birds, all the way down to crustaceans. Over 2,600 articles were focused on insects, over 1,000 articles on plants, and even 105 articles on fungi had been published. So just the fact that 638 taxonomic families, like this is throughout the entire tree of life, well, not the entire tree, but a very large proportion of the tree of life. And so we're really surprised by again, how pervasive iNaturalist data are being used in the scientific literature. Over 50% of articles were focused on 3 or fewer species. So a lot of like very taxonomically narrow focus throughout most of the published articles. And here's the analyses conducted. So most of the analyses were focused on species distribution and or descriptive. Those imply like range extensions. Like this is the first record of this species for Costa Rica or whatever it might be. A lot of those are focused on here. A lot of these are also species distribution models, so like kind of statistical models to estimate where a species is found in space and time. A lot of descriptive ones, right? Population measure, some reviews. The data type, most of the analyses were focused on observation data, meaning the what, when, where that I already introduced. Now, imagery is, when I showed that picture of the southern skipperling, it was a butterfly, but it was on a plant. So imagery is this idea of like the secondary data, and that is actually increasing through time, right? So here's an example of a zebra swallowtail that's pollinating. So I think this is like part of where the future is going to go. You can see this is increasing through time, the proportion of analyses that use imagery. Other examples include color morphs, like this eastern gray squirrel. There's different color morphs, and so people have studied that using iNaturalist images. There's a lot of information that is embedded in these images that I think is like fundamentally shifting biodiversity research. So just to wrap up this first case study, we located over 5,000 publications that use iNaturalist data. In the last 5 years, we found a 10-fold increase in the use of iNaturalist data in the literature, again, mirroring like the number of observations. And in 2022, 4 articles were published per day using iNaturalist, right? So we started this work in 2022. It was just published in July of 2025. That just goes to show how much work it was and how out of date it was almost immediately as soon as it was published. We did some back of the envelope calculations, and we estimate somewhere between 8 and 9 papers a day are probably using iNaturalist data in 2025. iNaturalist data, and then the last point again is I've already said this, but I just want to reiterate just how pervasive the data are being used across the scientific peer-reviewed literature, both geographically and taxonomically. And this is the paper that was published in Bioscience. Here's a QR code to the paper if you're interested in reading more. The next question that we were interested, so that was research, right? That's like kind of like the scientific research, peer-reviewed literature, the status quo for academics and how we use these data. The next question we were interested in is how are these data being used in policy? So we looked at the United States National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. It's arguably one of the more important pieces of legislature that comes out of the executive office of the White House. It involves the public in federal decision making. But basically what it does is it mandates for any federal piece of land that has something happen to it. It could be ranging from extraction of natural resources all the way to widening a bridge or fixing a bridge. Any federal piece of land has to go through this environmental impact assessment, an environmental impact statement. And so these environmental impact statements are then used to help mitigate potential, threats to threatened and endangered species. And anecdotally, I kind of had heard people using these data in, using citizen science data in policy documents, but nobody had ever really looked at it. And so I was really curious, like, can we look at it? A colleague from the University of Arizona runs this NEPA access database. And so they have compiled all the environmental impact statements that are out of NEPA. And so we searched this from 2012 to 2022, and we searched the word citizen science, community science, eBird, and iNaturalist. We went through over 1,300 EIS documents, and 228 were used in the analysis. And the number of EIS documents across the United States, basically every state had at least one environmental impact statement that had mentioned or used citizen science. 45 different agencies were represented: U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Forest Service, BLM, all the way down to NOAA and more. And for each one of these 200 plus EISs that were returned in our search, we quantified it like in a quantitative way. We categorized them by 4 uses. Nondescript is we weren't really sure, to be honest. It would say something about like an iNaturalist walk, but we weren't really sure what that was referring to or if it was actually used in the EIS. Suggested was an instance where they would recommend using citizen science, iNaturalist, eBird to monitor the potential impact that may have happened given that environmental impact, whatever that the case is. Direct is the one that we are like most interested in, right? So these citizen science data were directly applied to identify species of interest in the environmental impact statement. In other words, like data from citizen science were used to like make an inference or an implication about potential mitigation that needed to take place. So here's an example. In eBird, there are 687 records of 969 individuals on the Inyo National Forest. In other words, implying like, hey, the species exists, it needs to be considered within the context of this environmental impact. And then the last one was indirect, which is basically somewhat generic usage of, hey, this species red knot occurs along ocean coasts, cite eBird. So nothing that really has like a direct implication to that impact and to that environmental impact. So here's the results through time classified by these 4 definitions. From 2012 to 2022, you can see this like relatively steep increase in the number of environmental impact statements that are at least mentioning or using citizen science data, right? By 2022, just over 40% of environmental impact statements are at least mentioning it or using it. So 64% of the ones that mention or use citizen science are using that in a direct instance. Again, this implication or application of citizen science data to make an inference about that environmental impact. 19% indirect, 4% we weren't really sure, and 20% suggested. And most of those were using eBird, and 6% only using iNaturalist. I think this makes sense for 2 reasons. One, there's a pretty large bias towards threatened and endangered species in our ESA species, Environmental Endangered Species Act species. And so eBird is probably captures that bias, things like bald eagle, et cetera. The other reason is iNaturalist is, I think, still kind of the new kid on the block. I think it's just now being like trusted at that level that is being used. But I want to give one example. This is a direct quote from a environmental impact statement. No records of Arkansas river shiner have been submitted to iNaturalist from within or close to the landscape analysis area. In other words, this species, this rare species of fish, hasn't been observed in the area, the landscape analysis area. So this is a direct usage, making an implication about the use of using iNaturalist data about whether or not we have to mitigate and think about this species. The problem is, when you go to iNaturalist, there was only one record of Arkansas river shiner, right? So this is a bit of a problem. And we found that 12% of all environmental impact statements use no citing of a species as evidence of absence of that species. Without real clear, this is obviously a problem if you say that Arkansas river shiner isn't there, but there's only one record in all of iNaturalist because it's a tough species to find. People aren't necessarily dip netting for fish all that frequently. So I think this really needs to be considered more going forward and thinking about in the future. And so our results, the point of this paper was really just to open up a conversation about how citizen science data can and should be used in policy documents going forward. We focused on the federal level in large part because the data were available. I think it's being used more and more increasingly at smaller municipal scales, so in cities, county levels, state level, but those data are a lot harder to come by. Anecdotally, I hear more stories about concerned citizens going to their local council meetings and presenting iNaturalist data to make a point about endangered species X in their, in this proposed development area. And I think that this is only going to increase as these data become more accessible. And I think that it strengthens the role of the public in environmental review. But, as I pointed out, we need appropriate statistical analysis. We need a nuanced understanding of the data because these data aren't necessarily, because they have these biases, because they're unstructured, they aren't necessarily, you can't just take them at face value without thinking about some statistical analyses. And here's just a QR code to that paper that was also published this year and just discussing the citizen science as a tool for environmental review. So to sum up, like this portion, just checking the time, this portion of the presentation, right? I just gave two examples of policy and research and how I think that this participatory citizen science research is just transforming biodiversity research and conservation. And so I spend a lot of time as a scientist, like thinking about this. And so I think, this is like how I kind of convey what I try to think about. Right? I showed you earlier, these data are just like absolutely increasing. But even if they level off, we need to start thinking about how these data are going to be used 20 years from now because it's just going to increase. And so are there like methodological things we should be doing now so that 5, 10, 15 years from now, iNaturalist and citizen science and eBird data are integrated into our biodiversity monitoring and conservation decisions that we make? Okay, now I'm going to switch it back to me a little bit to introduce the next part of the talk. So that's like kind of citizen science so far, but I'm thinking a little bit about the future. I spend most of my life asking myself this question. I don't know if you guys know any birders or if there's any birders in the crowd, but I'm a quite serious birder, like that edge of like almost divorced kind of birder. Not yet, but so I take it very seriously. So serious, in fact, this is just my eBird profile. Someone once said that their eBird checklist was like 30 days in a row. And I was like, their checklist streak. And I was like, I didn't even know that existed. That was about 2,605 days ago. So I do an eBird checklist every single day since then. And this was going back to, I think, probably when I was doing my PhD. So this is a while now. Now, the problem is I don't always know where to go birding because I don't like making decisions. And so I asked myself this, like, where should I go birding? And I have this pipe dream, so to speak, that here's my house. This is in Sydney when I used to live there, Sydney, Australia. And I wish someone would just like text me in the morning and say, hey, you should go to this park because nobody's been there lately. And so the value of going there for like biodiversity data observation and contribution is actually really high compared to the park that 15 people went to yesterday. And so the value of going there isn't quite as high. And so we put this idea out there called marginal value of this dynamic context-dependent measure of how useful a new observation is to a citizen science platform based on where and when it occurs and how much prior data exists. And I won't go too much into the statistical measurement of it, but I do want to just touch on it briefly. So here are 4 different species from Australia, and this blue line is the trend. And the gray bars is our certainty around that trend, right? This 95% confidence interval. And so for noisy miner, we're pretty darn certain this bird is increasing. Mass lapwing, we don't really know. It looks flat, but it could be decreasing. It could be increasing. We're not really sure. And the idea is, as you get more observations, that certainty should decrease, right? Or did I say that right? The certainty should increase, right? So as you get more observations, we should become more certain about the trend. And so this is just what this visualization is showing. as we gain observations through time, you can see that this like uncertainty rapidly decreases. So we were interested in this idea of this like spatiotemporal variation in marginal value. So again, I won't bore you with the statistical details too much, but what we did was in Australia, this Greater Sydney region, we amalgamated all the species, all the bird species, close to 200 some odd bird species, and we tried to estimate the trends for all those bird species. And we were interested in where someone went, the statistical like leverage or the statistical probability that that observation had on our total understanding of biodiversity trends of birds. So what that gave us was this like spatiotemporal variation in value. And so here you can see like, so some grid cells, these are just 10 random grid cells from the Greater Sydney region. You can see some are like just relatively low value and they don't change. Some are medium value and they also don't change, like this turquoise line here. Others have like very dynamic patterns, right? So this one, nobody samples. Oh, someone samples. So the value decreases of sampling in that grid cell. Again, through time, nobody samples there. So the value slowly creeps up. Oh, someone samples, decrease. And that same pattern can be seen. Then you have some that are just like very up and down, depending on when and where people are sampling. So we can visualize that in this like spatiotemporal way, where yellow is the value of a given eBird checklist or a given citizen science sample. That's the higher value, and then red is the lower value. And so you can see like this is the remote part of the Greater Sydney region. So focus down here. Someone just sample. Oh, so the value actually decreases. That's like shifting the effort that we have from birders to the most valuable places for our understanding of biodiversity, right? So this is the idea, and like so this is basically where everybody lives in downtown Sydney. Like these are highly populated areas, so you can see these like relatively low value places because everybody lives there and there's lots of samples. So we were able to look at these like individual daily value of a given citizen science sample. And we found 4 species trends that the number of unique sampling days at a site, or in this case, grid, matters positively. So basically what that means is that places that have a lot of samples are actually really valuable to go to because statistically we need those samples to estimate trends. Similarly, the distance to previous samples also matters. And so sites that haven't been sampled recently or are spatially isolated contribute more to this like total trend analysis of all birds. So we put forth this idea of adaptive sampling, right? So this is this thinking of, again, thinking about where citizen science is going in the future. There's lots and lots of people contributing data, but how do we make it slightly better, right? Will people, if you tell people that, hey, I want you to go sample in this park because nobody's been there and it's more valuable for biodiversity sampling, will they do it? I mean, I said I would, but also I'm crazy obsessed. And so, you know, am I in the minority or will people actually do it? And so that's the next question that we asked. This was led by a PhD student in Australia who I worked with. And so we asked a bunch of people that use this citizen science app, Frog ID, a national citizen science platform in Australia. We asked them, how important are the following factors to you in terms of contributing to citizen science? Again, we have the standard Likert scale. You guys have already, everybody who's probably taken surveys that are, not important at all to very important. And what we found, similarly to where we started off in the beginning of the talk, over 1,000 participants, over 1,000 people contributed to our survey. And by and large, contributing to science was the number one reason why people contributed and used Frog ID. So if that's the reason, it's not illogical to think that if you gave people different sampling regimes, either temporally or spatially, that they would be willing to actually adapt their behavior. And so we asked, there's willingness to change behavior, both spatially and temporally. I know this is a bit busy, but essentially spatially and temporally showed the same exact pattern, more or less. And the main takeaway was people are, in fact, they say that they're in fact willing to change their behavior if their recordings, the observations for Frog ID are more valuable in either space or time. So, I mean, that was really cool. And that was like kind of promising results. but also people say a lot of things. I know I say a lot of things all the time that I don't always follow through on. So we wanted to know, like, will it really actually work, like for real, for real? And so in order to do that, we came up with this like pseudo experimental design using Frog ID in Australia. Let me walk through this briefly. We used 6 different local government areas. Those would be akin to like counties if you live in the United States or are familiar with that. But these like geopolitical regions, and we tried to select them a priori to have similar-ish characteristics. Again, this is like a pseudo experimental, real world experimental design that we're trying to do. So and those were based on the size, the number of participants, the number of frog species that we know exist in those areas, et cetera. So we had 2 that were control. We did not talk to those 2. Those 2 we just a priori selected them as control. And then we had 2 that we built a website for, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then we had 2 more that we built the website and gave a leaderboard to. So this website, just a quick video of what the website looks like. So we built this website that had priority maps updated every other week. So every 2 weeks, we updated this map. And we used some statistical analysis in the background based on species richness or a species accumulation curve to estimate grid cells that had different priority events. And so you can see, we ended up with this quantitative measure that we categorized into high, medium, low priority, and then no records and insufficient records. And these were always updated because as people go, this analysis is actually dependent. Again, this adaptive sampling is dependent on where people previously went. And so you can see that these are, all changing. So we did this every 2 weeks and we sent this website out. Now, 2 local government areas had the website. 2 more had the website plus a leaderboard. So a lot of citizen science platforms, they use kind of leaderboards and like incentives and some gamification techniques. But most of those are focused on total number of species, total number of records submitted. Very few are focused on like the value of those records. So that's what we tried to do here. We took the priority map and assigned value to low sampling, medium sampling, high priority sampling, right? So low priority gives you 1 point, 2 points for medium priority, 3 points for high priority. And we made this website plus the leaderboard in these 2 additional local government areas. Then we invited people. Now keep in mind, Frog ID was already going, right? Like it was already ongoing. And so we invited people that were already part of the platform to then join this like kind of experimental approach that we were doing. And here are the results. So I'm going to try to walk through this slowly. We have 6 different local government areas. These are the first 2 that are their control. Again, we did not talk to these. This is what we consider like the status quo, what would happen if we did not talk to anybody. The majority, for this one, what am I trying to say? Focus on the orange bars, right? The low priority samples, these are the total percentage of samples throughout the year based on what those samples were categorized as. The low priority was high for both of these controls, right? A lot of low priority samples percentage-wise. Here's the dynamic map, the website. You can see these orange bars actually shrink. The low priority is much smaller compared to these 2. Similarly, or in contrast, the high priority is actually quite large compared to these 2. Here's the dynamic map and the leaderboard. Again, look at these blue bars that are high priority samples. More people went to high priority sampling grid cells in these 3 local government areas compared to the controls, and relatively few low priority samples. Now, you may notice this one, this LGA Central Coast, they have a lot of medium priority. And this is kind of annoying because we dug into it and it turns out there's one super user that happened to live in a medium priority grid cell that just did a heck of a lot of sampling. And one of the reviewers was like, of this paper was like, well, you should remove them. And in hindsight, I kind of wish I would have, because it would have made this figure look a lot nicer in terms of the bars. But super users are an important component of citizen science platforms. So we decided to make a principal standard and include them. And regardless, we still had a statistically significant effect that the dynamic map or the website that we built, this priority sampling, produced more samples in high, medium, and low priority cells when compared with the control treatment, right? So in other words, we provided experimental evidence that these behavioral nudges in citizen science projects can improve biodiversity data. So again, I just want to come back to, this idea of thinking about what the field of biodiversity research looks like and how citizen science can be integrated into that field in the future. I think some of this adaptive sampling thought process is probably really important in terms of like increasing I've already shown the value of iNaturalist and eBird for research and policy, but I think we can even make it more valuable by thinking about how we encourage sampling in strategic ways. I spend a lot of time trying to think about outreach type things. So we produce these documents that are from the University of Florida. I have a research and extension appointment. And so here are just three examples. What we do is we try to encourage people. So they're like focused on Florida, but they're broadly applicable. We don't try to prescribe how to identify things. We try to prescribe how to find things and the value of uploading those organisms to iNaturalist to help and maximize the chances of you getting them identified. And yeah, I mean, hopefully at the end of this, everybody's like fired up to go on iNat. Feel free to follow me. I check every morning my like iNaturalist updates and see the people that I follow, like what they saw, and I'm basically just jealous when I'm sitting at my computer. The City Nature Challenge is April 24th, April 27th. Chances are you might live in a city that participates, so have a look at that. Here's my email. You can follow my research group on Instagram. They post cool videos and they're really good about like social media technology things. And yeah, thank you everybody for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corey. That was really awesome. Really appreciate it. That was a lot of very good information on using citizen science and applying it in a real way, in a real context, and coming up with some real world recommendations. So I'm very excited to hear about all of that. So I'm gonna go and have a look at the questions. So far, I'm only seeing one, but I have lots of questions. So,
Yes, go ahead and start with your question.
with my questions, okay,
Yeah,
all
sure.
right. So,
Yeah.
I have some some surrounding your stuff. What is your favorite iNaturalist discovery? What is the absolute favorite thing that you found or that you discovered that in the process?
For me, it's probably that butterfly that I started the story with, right? This like
Oh, okay.
species that had never been photographed before alive. So that was really exciting. I was like, when I was like, man, this is cool, that definitely had me feeling excited and like, yeah, probably one of my favorite discoveries. But I have a few other records that are another one that is I had the first moth for Florida. Because like Florida's not like it's relatively well sampled. So that was exciting to have like the first moth ever documented. On iNaturalist. So yeah, it's just like the birder in me is always interested in these like first finds. And so I think that's a large part of what gets me excited.
That's very cool. That happens a lot more than people think. I've had a similar experience where I took a picture of a butterfly outside or moth outside of my house, and it was the same thing, it was the first record for Trinidad of that particular species. So I totally endorse everybody getting out there and just
Yeah.
taking pictures of random things, no matter how tiny. Um,
So I have a question as well. And again, we could open up the, session for questions. Mine is sort of a two-parter. And so I just asked the first one here, which is I'm really curious, interested in the activity of science, of citizen science based on locations. So it seems like from some of your maps, I believe you had a map or two about this, that in the US seems to be across the globe the most activity in terms of science, citizen science. Is that true? And also, is there a state in the US in which there's higher citizen science activity? So that's the first part of it. The second part is how does citizen science happen, the activity in islands, not just Caribbean islands, but in other islands as well?
Yeah, so these are all good questions. I'll ramble for a minute, but just tell me if I
Okay.
get lost. Um,
Okay.
and these are complicated, right? Because there's a lot of like socioeconomic issues that underline the um, ability of an individual based on their
Mhm.
socioeconomic
Right.
background and where
Right.
they even live to even contribute or even to think about contributing to citizen science.
Right.
In part of the reason the US is so blown up on the map is because this isn't as big of an issue. But even within the US, even within given cities, there's a lot of work showing biodiversity data biases and as a function of redlining, right? Like historical legacies.
Mm.
So it's like very complex. And so I don't want to go into it in too much depth. And I'm also not an expert in this, but it is complex. California is probably high up in the, activity throughout the United States, but
Hmm.
um, globally, it's very complex as well. And there's plenty of work that shows like, a country's GDP, gross domestic product correlates with the activity of biodiversity um, observations on iNaturalist. Now, I think what becomes interesting is that in some places, because there isn't this like historic government-backed biodiversity monitoring or knowledge or surveying, iNaturalist I think is becoming, and John Asher makes this point a fair bit. I don't know if you know him, Lena, but
No.
right, like that iNaturalist is becoming a de facto field guide in a lot of
Mm.
regions because it's so heavily used, and it allows this like democratization of how science is done
Mhm.
because people can upload photos from their smartphone. Now, your point on islands, I don't know. Islands are interesting, but so is, I mean, I think you can group those in with the most of South America, for instance, that there's more and more locals contributing data, but
Mhm.
there's also a strong tourism, right? Like
Mm.
when people travel on vacation, myself included, just go nuts on INAT. So
Okay.
the data are contributed not by locals necessarily, but by tourists and locals. Now, how
Okay.
those differentiate is actually quite different because you'd expect that locals, probably get out to different areas where tourists probably all go to the same national park that everybody goes to.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, yeah. So again, I said I'd ramble. I'll stop rambling.
So does what he just said kind of jive with your experience on your WhatsApp group?
I mean, we have the WhatsApp group, but we also have I've set up projects on iNaturalist for pollinators and pests. So I've done one for every single island in the Caribbean. So I have a project on
Oh.
pollinators and pests of
Cool.
Trinidad and Tobago and literally every Caribbean island, including the language translation. So I had to translate in Dutch and Spanish and French for various, because I feel the language
Yeah.
barrier is also a thing if you're setting
Yep.
up projects in countries. Um, and then try to contact people that are already putting in the observations and ask them to join the project so that they can then add to those so that we can, and the data is free to collect for everybody. I mean, you can download the spreadsheets from My Naturalist once you turn it into a particular type of project. Um, and yeah, so we do get a lot of people from other countries and visitors that do add observations to the projects.
Mhm.
And that has been part of it. But yeah, so the I find the projects are very helpful in gathering data and getting people involved. And but the thing is to get people to join in the first place.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I'll
And
I'll jump to the chat question because I think it's if
yeah,
that's
Yeah.
okay.
yeah. Mhm.
C. Gustin,
Yeah.
they asked. There's three apps for iNaturalist, so I'll
Mhm.
talk about that briefly. So if you're an iPhone user, which I'm assuming you are, C. Justin,
Mhm.
Gustin,
Justin, yeah, it's C Gus.
yes.
It's Chris.
Oh,
Chris,
Chris. Okay, sorry. I
Chris.
assume you're an iPhone user because for iPhone they now have iNaturalist, a new app, a new rendition of the app.
Yeah.
So you want to go with iNaturalist. iNaturalist Classic is like an older version,
Mhm.
but all the observations are ported over. Android doesn't have that new version yet, but so for iPhone users, Seek by iNaturalist that's another good question. So Seek is run by a naturalist. Seek is really geared towards school children. It
Mhm.
it it alleviates some of the privacy issues surrounding iNaturalist. And so, I suggest generally people stick to iNaturalist. Yeah. And
Okay.
then the second question by Chris was, does iNaturalist identify invasive species for you? Yeah, I thought about having more slides about how iNaturalist worked, but Desmond said we only had an hour, so I didn't want to talk for 2 hours. But like just briefly, the way it works is you upload a photo from your smartphone or the web, and AI or a computer vision model identifies it for you first, and then humans come along and confirm or disagree with that identification. And so yes, it will identify non-native species as well as native species. It's quite a good model,
So
but there's always a human element.
when you upload a picture, it'll automatically come back with a, hey, we think it's this. And then you have some experts that come in and say, yeah, that is what it is, or no, it's actually this.
Correct. That is absolutely correct. Yep.
Okay. Do they do that directly on the picture you submit?
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can just show you real quick, I think. Is that okay, Desmond?
I'm
Yeah,
about
yeah.
to get in shape because I'm going to go wandering around everywhere.
That's awesome. That's
Sure,
perfect. Let's
go ahead
see.
and show us if you, yeah.
Yeah, let's not look at my crazy email, but yeah, hold
I
on.
live really close to 3 different man-made dams.
Okay.
And the areas that surround those 3 dams are protected areas by the city
Mm-hmm.
that they reside in. And so we go walking out there all the time. Maybe not in winter so much, but definitely when it's warmer.
Yeah.
But and sometimes we can see the flooding and stuff like that and how it changes where things are located. So it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so here's just a quick example, right? Like here's an observation I had from a couple weeks ago in Colombia. This is an Andean siskin, so I upload it, and then someone comes along and says, okay, and I choose Andean siskin. Now the computer vision told that. I also happen to know the species, but for insects, I don't know that many. And then someone came along and said, yep, that's right, Andean siskin, agree. So here, I'll show you another way, and what I spend too much time doing probably, or maybe not enough time, depending on your thought process. So I go into this identify portal, and I'll just be like, okay, cool. So click on it. So someone uploaded this observation of wood duck 2 minutes ago, somewhere near Toronto. I know it's a wood duck, so I say agree. And then it switches to research grade. That's a white-tailed eagle in Germany, agree.
Corey?
Yep.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'll stop showing.
I know you're birdie person.
Sometimes.
Have you ever been to any country in Africa, Liberia specifically?
My wife and my 5-year-old, we did a trip to South Africa last year, last Christmas for the first time. That was my first time ever in Africa.
Okay.
And yeah, it was awesome. It was, yeah, so many good birds.
Did you know that Liberia has 700 species of birds, including 21 that is globally threatened. So
Are you in Liberia?
yeah.
Okay.
Right now I'm in Miami, Florida.
Ah, okay. That's
But
not far at all. That's hilarious.
I just got to Miami just yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah, from Liberia. So, and I'm on my way to the COP 30
Yep.
to Brazil. So
Yep.
I was just wondering, if you're thinking about birds, one of the most fascinating places to visit would be Liberia, for sure.
Well, now I know somebody from Liberia, so please drop me a line because I'm always trying to find places to go see more birds. I just got to convince
Okay.
my family of it first.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Lena, you had another question?
Oh
Okay.
yeah, let me go back to my book. What are some of
There's a
what do you
list.
think are some yeah, what are some of the undersampled groups of organisms or taxa, and what would you encourage that people actually go out and look for?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I mean, insects are always undersampled, right? And so,
Mm,
but what would I encourage people to go out and look for? Whatever gets you excited, right? Like it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed, you can contribute to science by observing birds, but also ants and anything else in between.
mm,
So to me, it's all about what gets you excited and kind of what keeps you motivated to go. And sometimes it's not about like a species group. Sometimes it's about your local environment. Like Chris just mentioned the dam and when it floods, right? So it's like this like change in the environment that might get people excited. So yeah, I feel like I'm not answering that question because it's a tricky one, but yeah.
Yeah, because when it floods, we see more crustaceans washed up further where we can see them. Whereas when the water is low, they tend to hide further into the river.
mhm.
Yeah, but that was a pretty good answer. I have no problems with that.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. People
And
do,
sort of
yeah.
what countries or areas do you think could benefit from more citizen science? Like when you look at a map or when you find a particular part of the globe, it doesn't have to be country, but maybe a region within a certain country or a type of environment, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, large parts of Africa are always underrepresented on the map. Again, but comes back to these like very complex socioeconomic kind of things that underlie when and where and why biodiversity data are collected via citizen science.
Right. And I have a question sort of related to that, especially given what you said about the socioeconomic and all of that influences. What can be done to promote greater participation in citizen science? I know you mentioned a few things at the end, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like training and education, right? Like, and the value. I think for me personally, as an academic, one of the things I like to do is highlight like that's part of the reason for these papers is to like highlight how data are being used because I think that's a really strong motivator for people to continue contributing to different platforms, right? Like a lot of times we just submit observations and we think, oh, this is probably good for science. We don't actually see that loop completed. And so I think that's, one. But other than that, I mean, it's a lot of training and just knowledge that these apps even exist.
So I know you focus on citizen science with respect to biodiversity, but I'm pretty sure you're aware that citizen science is multidisciplinary,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? So have you given any thought, for example, in our area, one of the things that we are interested in is the incidence and the prevalence of asthma and
Mm.
environmental triggers. And so, do you have some suggestions perhaps on how we could get citizens here more interested in making observations about things in the environment that might trigger?
None. No, I'm
No?
gonna punt. I'm gonna punt on that one. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a good question, and but I'm gonna stick to my lane of biodiversity because,
I mean, for
but
example,
you're absolutely right. Like, right, like the field of citizen science is super interdisciplinary across many, many different fields of science, and it's, but yeah.
Well, I
uh,
wonder if they could
This
do
meant
something with like iNaturalist to show what pollinating trees, grasses, and flowers there are in certain time frames and cross-discipline that with other places. That would be a research thing, I would think.
Yeah.
well, Dr.
so
Murray,
so
I just
Laura,
wanted to
oh, okay, go ahead. I was going to ask Laura something. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that Corey, thank you for this educational journey in just an hour, hour and a half. And Dr. Murray, thank you for this platform. I didn't know what to expect when I came on. And even I've learned so much. And even when Dr. Murray proposed the twofold question and it opened up more communication, I was just like, wow, I am learning so much through Environmental Fridays. I was like, what is it going to be about? What is that about? What is that about? But now I'm sitting here and you have taken me to another level. So sincerely, thank you for that. And when I thought about everything that's been mentioned, even at the Q&A section session, I'm thinking about we went into a school, an elementary school, the other day that had nothing to do with this, but guess what? It did, because at the end of this meeting with the principal, we talked about helping the school to establish maybe an environmental club or something to that nature. We don't know yet. We're meeting with them again. But remember the app you turned me on to, Dr. Murray, that you can take a picture of a plant and it would tell you about the plant and everything?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about what Corey's been talking about and other things that you guys and people on this Environmental Fridays may know about. There are other ways we can be that, that platform, that change, that interest that would get a young person to really think about career opportunities, about their community, about the environment. So I think what Corey talked about and some of the other tools we have, we can do it. We can inspire. We can even have this summer, a summer club that consists of not just students like we're going to do with this one elementary school, but citizens that come on board. When I go out to the parks, you have yoga clubs. You have people doing yoga at the park. You have people doing this at the park. Why don't we really tap into our community? And maybe you guys can think about it as well. And I think the one young lady, she's doing it in where she's at. But why don't we tap in establishing more local clubs that could have an interest or may have an interest in doing what Corey has educated us about today?
Right. So we could try to promote and utilize the platforms iNaturalist as well as eBird with the schools, with our local community members and stuff like that. And I wanted to bring Laurel into this too, because I think to some degree, haven't you done, either you or Lloyd have done some sort of citizen science type things here, Laurel?
To an effect, I mean, I usually use other citizen science work. So, as an example, the US EPA has a volunteer water monitoring network completely run by citizens. I want to share a funny story, kind of unrelated, kind of related. We have a
Okay.
feeder. We live in the middle of Chicago on Lake Michigan. I can see, what's it called? Wrigley Field, kind of off my right shoulder. Um, and we have finches. And the finches got mad because it snowed and they came up and squawked at us to put the bird feeder back up, which we did. And so I have lots of finches. And then I'm sitting at my desk working, talking to a colleague in Atlanta. And I look out the window and there's a juvenile peregrine falcon perched on my bird feeder. And I went, we've set up a murder station.
Oh my
So
God.
my citizen science, I don't want to be finding any little finch bodies in my patio balcony because of my love of birds. And we also have a bat monitoring network in Chicago. And not only that, Lincoln Park Zoo is getting very interested in something called One Health, which is the connection between animals, humans, the environment. I think COVID-19 really emphasized that we get diseases from animals. We give diseases to animals, birds, for example. And they have a program in some of our city alleys, not to kill rats, but they're documenting them with little tiny cameras in feeding stations. And some of our DePaul interns are checking the feed stations, looking at the camera, downloading data. So there's projects like this all over the place. The power in it is that they're making it into the peer-reviewed literature, that they're that respected and they're that valid, that citizen data is, you don't have to be a PhD to do
Right. That's
it.
part of the message. Exactly.
Big part of the message, and that it's a
Yeah.
very well respected effort.
So now, didn't you do some similar sort of citizen science when you work with the Navajo nations?
Yes, we trained our students in environmental site assessment. We made sure they were not on any contamination. We were very careful, but they learned environmental health. They became certified in environmental health and land reuse, so they could. This was through a National Science Foundation funded summer program. Our interns, what's so exciting is one went into public health and one decided to go into environmental studies. So it was successful, but they also helped screen soil samples using X-ray fluorescence at a big community event in Navajo, New Mexico. So we do a lot of work in communities. I would like to mention that Benton Harbor is soon becoming a citizen science network Berrien County because people will be having air monitors reporting to a global map.
Yep.
And outdoor air monitors.
So I know Corey focused on biodiversity and citizen science, but I want to make the point, and you heard from different persons, that this is something that is multidisciplinary. It's not just focused on biodiversity. So if you have other projects, environmental or what have you, um, you could get involved with citizen science. It just basically starts, as we just said, you don't need a PhD or anything like that. You just need curiosity and observation. That's it. Okay? Curiosity and observation. What is it like, Lena, in Trinidad? And Pat, I know Pat is also from Trinidad. And who else is in Trinidad here? Is Len on here too? Um, what do you think the level of citizen science in Trinidad is?
So I think we're making a bit of a dent. I think when we started, it was a little slow. We also have the other organizations that have been pushing it. So University of West Indies, I think the Zoology Museum, they have been trying to get people, especially young people, students, involved and doing more of that kind of thing. Through our projects as well, we've been trying to get kids to do stuff. We've been trying to get schools to start programs, and we've developed lab exercises and exercises to get kids out and to start looking at things. I think it's picking up a little bit.
Okay.
We're definitely developing some interest, but again, it's also a consistency thing. People might find it as this novel thing. They might download it. They might run around and take 10
Right.
pictures. And then, the excitement wears off. I think the bigger challenge is sort of in sustaining it and having people to continue to do it.
Yeah.
But it's just a way, it's just to keep on reminding people that it's a very simple thing. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to hike through the bush for hours to take some pictures of some plants. You could do it right in your backyard. You can document what's around you. And but I think it's starting to pick up a bit.
They could get the consistency bug from Corey. Corey is definitely consistent.
Yeah, I spend too much time if you ask my wife, but yeah. But you're right, there is like this maintenance, right? There's this like retention thing, and it's always a challenge, and there's no real solution. But yeah, cool. Desmond, I unfortunately do have to leave in like a minute because I have to get across across campus a little bit to get to a meeting.
Okay, well, we are about to close, so thank you so very much. And we'll just go ahead and close. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Corey, for being our guest speaker and our co-host. Thanks to all of our participants, all of those who attended here today. Hopefully, like Princella said, we all learned something different and new, and like Corey is trying to instill within us that consistency and passion for citizen science and biodiversity in his area. So we want to thank everyone for this, and we hope you have a great weekend. If it's Friday, it's Environmental Fridays. It is personal. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much, and feel free to reach out, anybody. Yeah.
All right.
See you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.